Welcome to the Heat of Command podcast, Mastering the Art of Fire Service Leadership,
where we, your hosts, aim to teach you how to use introspection and self-reflection to be your most authentic, genuine self, leader, and human being.
And now, here are your hosts. This is Kyle Matusik.
And Carrie Henderson. Thanks for joining. Hey, everybody. Welcome back for another episode of the Heat of Command podcast with Kyle and Carrie. And I'm excited about today's episode. We're going to talk about conversations and the art of difficult conversations. This is a skill that is learned, and some people are just naturally good at talking to people and reading the room and all the great emotional intelligence stuff. But sometimes, and I think for everybody, you got to practice it and you got to be willing to do it and understand why and how to approach people. And the importance of having conversations with people, all different types of conversations, and what that can do for the growth and development of your people and for you too. Because every time I have a hard conversation with someone, to me, I always have to think about, it's comfortable for me to have to say hard things to people, right? It should be. You shouldn't feel comfortable going, you suck, or whatever it is, or hey, I have a problem with you. So every time I approach it from humility and grace and have that conversation, 9 times out of 10, both people can leave a conversation with some positive out of it, I think, anyways. What do you think?
Yeah, I think if you're going to lead, you have to be prepared to have difficult conversations. And, sometimes there's some reasons why we don't want to have the conversation, right? The fear of conflict. We've never developed those skills. We think it's unkind, or, we just don't make it a priority. And when we're leading people, the people should be our highest priority. So that's like an easy one to knock off, And then how do we get into these difficult conversations and how do we go about having them? And I think we also, it's two ends, right? Because you have the messenger and the receiver of a conversation. There's two sides. And a lot of times we also fear that defensiveness, right? When you bring up an issue, and how do we get rid of that defensiveness immediately so the conversation doesn't become, me versus you or this versus that. It's just what it is a conversation. And it goes back to, basic. But before we even talk about hard communication and hard conversation, like what's just basic communication? And it's there's a sender and a receiver, and you have to listen. And active listening is we're sitting there listening, taking in the message, not ready to respond right away with an idea in our head. So it's two sides of that conversation, being an active listener. And when you're going to go have these hard conversations, and especially if you're in a position of, administration or leadership, being able to actively listen, I think, is the most important part of that difficult conversation.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I also feel like sometimes when we want to have a difficult conversation with someone, and this may just be me, but it's like you want to get all the message out, and you don't take enough time to develop everything that you want to say to someone. So you don't give them enough back information of why you're having the meeting with them, or because you want to kind of get through it. So you're like, well, you did, I want to talk to you about this, and this. Okay, what do you think? It's like, okay, well, let me tell you the whole reason and the whole story, and then now it's your turn, or now it's time for back and forth. But we kind of rush through that delivery sometimes.
Yeah, and I think it's having these conversations with people, and a lot of times when we think hard conversations, we always it has this like negative tone to it, and it doesn't have to be negative, right? It could be a professional development conversation where you're talking to somebody who has never strived to be anything else, but they do a good job, so it's not really negative. It's like, how do we motivate and empower to continue to build? So hard conversations, we just can't think of negative. And that's like the area where you can start learning and getting involved with to have these hard conversations. It's pulling the people aside and having talks just about, regular stuff. And I think like I said, the biggest thing is the defensiveness and learning to approach these in a very open-minded type way. And especially in a position of leadership, we have to maintain open-mindedness to the responses that we're going to receive. We need to take those in, and if we can quickly process them, cool. If not, just take some notes, and we can follow up on things. We don't need to have all the answers all the time. And I think what's really important as, the one wanting the conversation or the position of leadership is that you cannot get defensive, because there's a good chance the other side might immediately, but you cannot. And then the goal would be to try and reel that in a little bit to get the conversation going in a good way. Because the end goal, we have to look at the end goal of a conversation, and it might be to change a behavior, to motivate, to empower. Like, it's all positive things that we're trying to do. So the conversation has to be positive. And when we look at that, it should be, we say it's a hard conversation, but it should be, as you practice, like an easy conversation, because we're trying to get the best out of people, and we're trying to encourage, motivate, and do better things for our organization. So, it's just taking that mindset and kind of shifting it a little bit. And this is what's cool about everything we talk about, because everything is full circle, right? It goes back to your values. What do you value, and how do you bring that into a conversation? How are you being your genuine self and authentic to be able to have this conversation? Because a lot of times I think right now, if I went into some meetings or conversations and you look at somebody and they're trying to be these things that we're talking about or you read about, and you're like, this isn't, it's just not genuine. So do the work that Carrie and I have been talking about, for the last few months, and it will make this process even easier.
Yeah. The more you do it, the more you do it from a place that's authentic to you. So the more times that Carrie approaches hard conversations and uncomfortable conversations from a place that I'm comfortable with, it doesn't get easier necessarily, but I'm more comfortable approaching someone and having those conversations, because my opinion is I'm an over communicator, and I don't think people communicate enough in any industry, not just the fire service. People are not willing to have enough conversation, so that when they have to have a hard conversation, A, it doesn't go well. B, people are defensive because they're not used to being really coached or mentored. So if you're regularly giving feedback of all kinds, and regularly, like, time and place giving feedback. So, like, you're on this call, this thing happened, didn't love it. Let's talk about it right now. So it's not this big ordeal. It's, hey, I didn't love the way this went. Next time, I need you to be faster, quicker, more efficient, or put your gear on quicker. We need to practice forcible entry, whatever it is. I'm regularly giving feedback like that, so that when I do have to have a harder conversation, it's not this huge deal. We're used to Carrie, calling us in because our reports aren't, 100%, but also giving good feedback. Hey guys, that was freaking amazing. Great job on that. Just constantly communicating the expectation, the performance outcomes, and coaching and mentoring constantly. And then it's not a big of a deal, because I see not so many, but I see people who don't say a lot, like, good or bad, about performance. They don't address it either way. So then they have to address some performance thing, and it's this shock, and it's weird, and it's awkward, and the people are defensive because they're just not used to a lot of communication from their officer.
Yeah, I think when we talk hard conversations, I think most of the conversations that people will think about is the performance-based conversation. Because if you crash a rig or you do something stupid on a call and you're going to get in trouble, that's really not a hard conversation, right? Like, everybody knows you crashed a rig, you're, whatever, there's a procedure, and with that, a lot of it's procedural. So it is what it is. And it's very black and white and has to go a certain way, especially, by me, based on union contracts and things of that nature. So it's not those conversations. Those are essentially the easy conversations. It's the conversations where, it's unknown what the outcome's going to be. It's unknown what the real issue is, and nobody has ever gotten to a complete root cause, whether it's lack of motivation, lack of being empowered, lack of leadership, lack of, desire to do any better, lack of competence within the job or confidence. And then it's like, okay, So if we're start addressing these issues, then it's also, again, being in a position of leadership or administration, what's the solution, right? So it's having that full, we're going into a conversation, let's just say performance-based conversation, and we're going into this, what's our end goal? Well, I think we know what our end goal is. Can you anticipate some of the responses you're going to get? And then how can we combat those? And how can we prepare for those answers for the best interest of the person that we're talking to? Because that should be the end goal.
Yeah, absolutely. The conversations Kyle and I are talking about are the ones in which you want a behavior change. Usually, it's you want something, not necessarily behavior, but usually a behavioral change, or you want some sort of change to happen. So most of the time, it's a performance issue that you're addressing, or sometimes for me, it's I always will like to address the elephant in the room. So if our group dynamics are kind of screwed up, I'm going to say, hey, what's going on here? What is it? Me? Am I doing something? Is it? I feel there's this elephant in the room or this awkwardness. What's the cause of that? So sometimes those are hard conversations too. But conversations usually once you've gone through these hard conversations, tried behavior modification, the conversations where you're at the point of discipline, those usually aren't conversations, right? We're past that. We have addressed this and this and this. I'm not at this point looking to have a conversation because we've had multiple. Here's the disciplinary action because we have gone through all of these steps. So what we're talking about is all the stuff leading up or before that, because you're trying to prevent that. You're trying to not get there.
Yeah, your goal should not be to fire somebody, right? Your
Right,
goal should
right.
be to see what the issue is and how can I fix that as an administrator leader within the organization. That should be the goal. And sometimes, that just kind of gets twisted around in how we think and what we do to kind of alleviate some of those problems and issues that we face in terms of performance. I think some of the biggest things is we have to engage our people with curiosity. Like, why are they the way they are? Why aren't they connecting? Or, man, they connected for 5 years and all of a sudden we lost them. What's going on? So have that curiosity and ask those questions, ask those leading questions to try and get some answers, not just based on, because it could be something that you're never even been aware of, and there's no trust within an organization where somebody's going to open up. So, sometimes you might be on an investigative mission to find out what's really going on and if there's anything you can do. And then we want some positive intent in our approach. It should be all positive based. And I think finally, well, not finally, but one of the biggest things, if you're going in for these conversations, are you ready to hear some of the answers? And are you okay with hearing some of the answers that might come your way? I think a lot of times, maybe not a lot of times, but sometimes there's one word that kind of, it bothers me a little bit, and that's, we've all heard it, insubordination, right? And sometimes people hide behind this because if you say one thing wrong about a superior, they can fire you for that or they can discipline you for that. Now, I know there's context, right? And we can say, yeah, if there's absolute berating and really bad, like, okay, let's address it. But if we're going to go in these conversations and somebody says something, you can't hide behind that insubordination. It is like an open door, open slate, like say what you need to say. We want to fix this and we're going to do it together, but you have to be honest with me, whether it hurts my feelings or not. And then what am I going to do with it?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Because insubordination. I haven't heard that one in a while, actually.
Right.
Yeah. That was like the catch-all. If you need to write the up, it's like, it's insubordination. Because I can't find anything in the policy manual.
So that's what we're going to use.
That's what it is. So
I think that needs to go. We need to redefine what that word means. Like, obviously on a fireground or a direct order, like, cool, and you completely disobey it, right? Like, don't go to roof and you go to the roof, like, yes, insubordination.
Well,
but
there's stuff around the fire station too. Like, you've been told multiple times not to do this, and you're doing it, and you're doing it out of spite. Yeah, that's a different ballgame. It does exist. So don't get us wrong. It exists. But
absolutely.
But yeah, it is I think I got written up in the fire academy for insubordination. It's a long story, but it was goofy. We had to wear these ropes, like we had to carry a rope all the time to practice ropes and knots. But we had to wear them. So you could either wear them like a belt or you could wear them like a sash kind of. And we wore ours like a sash. Everybody had to wear theirs the same. Well, somebody forgot theirs one day. It was like the second to last day of the fire academy. And mine was really long. So I was like, no problem. We'll cut it. We'll cut mine, but then we all have to wear them as belts. So I think this was leadership right here, right? I said, hey, we're going to cut this, but now, so I got the whole academy. We all wear ours as belts. And they're like, Miss Bleckfeld, that was my maiden name. Why is everyone wearing their ropes differently? I'm like, oh, just thought we'd try something new. They wrote me up. I was like, so, insubordination.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Anyways, I digress. But, I've taken some difficult conversations classes, some good, some not so good, but I did take a really good one through the National Fire Academy and she was really good. And what we talk about all the time, Kyle, about leading compassionately and empathetically, and you just hit on it, is why is this behavior occurring? What is the thing? And what do I need to figure out before I have this conversation with someone, or try to look at, or try to at least understand. And that was a lot of what she talked about in this class. And it was interesting because there were people in that class that I think thought they were really good at hard conversations, but they were just jerks. They were like, I don't mind having hard conversations. I'm like, oh, I know you don't, but you don't get any outcome because you're a jerk. You just go, you're not having a conversation. You're telling someone they suck. Like in those terms. So there is an art to difficult conversations, because it's not just telling someone they suck. It's getting someone to decide they need to change, or to understand what the need is, or what your expectations are. It's so much more than just sitting down with someone and saying you're not performing.
Yeah, I love that you brought that up, because an environment that I'm familiar with is hearing that you suck. First 8 years of my career, there'd be, I guess you would say, motivational speeches where we were told we sucked and we weren't real firefighters. And you're like, these are not hard conversations. Like, going in and saying that stuff is not a hard conversation. That's like you said, Carrie, you're being a jerk. That's it. And so that's not what we mean, like hard conversation. It's being able to, again, engage with somebody, be curious, and connect with a fellow human being, and we have talked in the past about being soft and safe. And a lot of times the people, who can't have these hard conversations are saying that we're soft and, we're getting weaker and all this stuff. And it's like, well, let's be able to have a real conversation about this stuff. And then we can get to some, root cause of all of it. I think what's really interesting, especially in the fire service, and I think it's a personality thing. I'm a very logical person. Everything, has its place. And especially, we go on emergencies and everything's boom, 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 boom. So that's our mindset. And a lot of times I think people want, you look up when you're going for promotion or whatever, or you're in leadership classes, and they have the conflict resolution models and step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. And you're just like, but I think in our industry, like, so many people want that. They want a recipe of what it looks like to have a hard conversation, and they want to follow step 1, step 2, what, I don't know, maybe 5 years ago, but like the big talk in a lot of the classes was, don't sit behind your desk when you're having a conversation. And then, like, you see everybody start doing it and you're like, okay, like, I get
You know what you're doing.
Yeah, it's not because you want to. You read it in a book or you were told in a class. Like, come on. Like, I don't care if you sit behind your desk if you're genuine and authentic. Like, if that's where you want to be, cool, and that's how you're coming off.
This is my office. This is where I sit.
Right. It's so weird, but like, you could go to these classes and you could tell people who just came out of a class, because they're like, they just did this, this, and this, and that's how they're having a conversation. And that's where it's just like the full circleness of authentic, genuine values, introspection, empathy, compassion. Like, it matters in everything that we do. And if you work on those things, these hard conversations don't become so hard, because you're trying to get the same out of somebody else.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was one of my employees. This is a perfect time for this episode, because one of my employees had to have a hard conversation with someone, and he came to ask me for some advice. And he's like, I don't know how to approach this because the person is higher rank than they are. But my employee is in charge of EMS education for our department. And so he has to address the instructors, behavior that come in. And he needed to talk to someone that was a captain about some stuff that had happened without getting into too much detail. And he said, he's a captain and I'm not, but I really, need to address it. I don't know what to do. And I said, go in it just like you just told me that, hey, go in it very humbly. I realize I am not an officer, and you're a captain, and I understand my position, but I want to talk to you about some things that happened to clear the air and to get better understanding of what happened and to, kind of voice some concerns. And so we talked through some more stuff about how to have the conversation, and that, that it wasn't I said, if you let this go and you don't bring it up, it's going to eat at you, right? That's how almost all of these conversations, and if you have to decide if you need to have a conversation or not, what happens if you don't? That's what I always ask myself. Is this something I need to talk to somebody about or not? What happens if I don't? Well, if I don't, and this behavior continues, it's not acceptable, or, if it's performance stuff, somebody could get hurt, or it compounds, or whatever it is. So that's what I always ask myself. So I, was talking to my employee. I was like, it's going to eat at you if you don't have the conversation. B, it's going to cause some group dynamic issues if that instructor comes back and these other people come back, whatever. So anyways, he goes and he has the conversation, and he comes in this morning and he's like smiling. He's like super smiling. He's like, it went so well. And he felt so good about it. So now from a coaching and mentoring standpoint, every time he has these conversations and they don't always go right. You're not always going to get somebody to see your side. You're not always going to get somebody to go exactly right, but you can always, like in his instance, there was some other stuff that he didn't know about that had taken place. So now they both have better understanding. But in this case, he's going to be more comfortable and more apt to have a hard conversation with somebody going forward. And that just develops your leaders for the future. And then the person he had the conversation with came up to me today and was like, hey, such and such came to me and he did such a good job. So it was like this full circle thing it was just beautiful. It was so beautiful.
Man, y'all killing it over in James City County.
No. Let me tell you, there's some people that I've had conversations with lately that I'm like, it doesn't matter what words I use. This person wants to hear nothing I have to say, but it has to be said, and it's my responsibility to say it. And I'm going to say it in the best way I can. And sometimes it's just a one-way message.
Yeah, I think, that example that you brought up is pretty awesome. And for people out there that are, more junior in your organizations, I think that's a good note just to take away from this and, get your allies within another officer rank and get some feedback and some advice on how to approach a conversation. And don't be afraid to have that conversation, though, I think is what I took away from that story. Like, don't be afraid to have it, regardless of your rank or where you are. If you feel a conversation needs to be, obviously there's a right and a wrong way to go about it. Just don't barge into the chief's office and be like, Chief, I need to talk to you right now. Go through your chain of command and look for somebody who's going to mentor you through that process. And maybe even invite them in on the meeting to make sure it just goes well. Like, it's a learning experience. We're all growing. We're all in this together. Let's progress together. But I think that's a pretty awesome story to hear about somebody junior, because the conversations aren't always just one side, from administration leadership roles down to, subordinates. It could go the other way as well. And I think that's a pretty awesome level of maturity to see in junior people, to be able to take on conversations like that.
Yeah. And the more we empower our folks to have conversations, in the future, they're going to make great leaders, great supervisors, great leaders, and good coworkers. Because when you work with people that are comfortable saying, not pointing out your weaknesses, but in theory, pointing out your weaknesses, but like helping you and coach you and mentor you in a way that you can receive it it just makes everything so much better. Like I've worked for people before that everything's hunky dory. Like you're not, it's just not enough feedback for me. I like a lot of feedback, a lot of communication, good and bad.
Yeah, and if you're going to point out my weakness, cool, but tell me how to fix it or help me fix it.
Yeah.
Like, that's what I want. Like, cool, because there's a good chance I know what my weaknesses are already, but like, can you help me? Because I've tried to help it myself and I can't, like I've tried this, it's not working. How about you help me? But, a lot of times, it's just this self-righteousness. And again, I think a lot of the issues aren't just in the fire service. It's just a society-wide. And, we live in this self-righteous, our own personal bubbles, and we can't infringe on other people's bubbles and this and that. And like, we need to get away from that. And I think, what's cool, especially in our conversation today, is, we are literally talking about the cultural shift maybe in our industry because, 20 years ago, they wouldn't be talking about having the hard conversations was, you suck, you better be doing this. And that's it. End of story. Rub some sand on it. Let's go. So to actually see that we're heading in the right direction, I sometimes you always wish it was a little faster, but it's cool to see the growth and the progress that is being made.
Yeah. And I would say too, another just tidbit, what helps me, and especially if you're worried about delivering a message and getting pushback, like if you're worried about, you have to tell somebody something and they're going to argue and say, no, I didn't, or you're wrong, or you're getting it wrong. You don't, and that's, pretty typical. Make sure that what you are bringing is not subjective. You want to bring objective information. So not, when you do this, I feel this way, or I think that it is causing this. You need to bring information that is, you've been late this many times, which causes somebody to have to be held over, or somebody can't leave, or whatever. That's a very basic, those are usually actually the easiest. Being late is like the easiest thing to handle usually. But it's other things like that performance. Like on this date, I talked to you about, we had a casual conversation at the back of the engine about engine placement. And then on this date, I had to tell you where to place the engine as we pulled up. And then on this date, you had to reposition the engine. Those are very, objective based things. So there really isn't a lot of room for argument. Does that make sense? Because I feel like sometimes you come into a conversation and you go, you need to get better at engine placement. And then they're like, well, I've been practicing it and, I don't see the problem. Nobody else has a problem with it. Nobody's ever said anything to me. And that's another thing is you have to be regularly giving that feedback, right, so that when you're having these conversations, it's not a surprise. So having very objective things instead of going in and saying your performance isn't great, you piss everybody off, you're lazy. Well, you telling someone they're lazy that's subjective. That's a conversation that you come in with, everybody, all the guys are outside throwing ladders and you're in here in the recliner. Or after dinner, everybody's in here cleaning up and you have to go suddenly to the bathroom for 30 minutes, or, yeah, whatever. And that's not a lie.
That happens there too.
Yeah. But it's, all those things are just walking past stuff that needs to be done. Yes, that's lazy, but it's objective examples so that people go, oh, okay. And it's easier for them to fix it. And it's easy. It's harder for them to argue what you're trying to say.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, as you, the one having the, wanting the conversation and, just going in with all the facts, but also let the person on the other side, if they're going to get emotional, like kind of try to read them, like why, like, what's going on here, and let them be that. And that's okay. But you need to draw your line and make sure you don't go there, because it's all, we're down to business right now. I think it's very important to have that. And I think, on the back end of these conversations, it's offering room for whoever you're having the conversation with to say whatever they want, and for you to sit there and listen, like really, really listen to what they're saying. What's their body language saying? What's their facial expression saying? What are they literally saying? Because there's a lot of information in a lot of that stuff that we often miss. by not listening actively. And I think that's very important. And then from there, as the conversation's wrapping up, ensuring that there's room for following up, if there's an improvement action plan, if there's a timeline, whatever, that everybody is on the same page. As you summarize your meeting and your talk, like, is everybody walking out with the same idea in their head, or is one person thinking it was discipline, the other thought it was like a motivational time? Like, then we're not on the same page. We got to get on the same page. So you got to make sure that you're leaving that conversation on the same page, and then setting that time up for follow-up for further mentoring or improvement or whatever the case may be.
Yeah, 100%. Because follow-up is so big. Regular communication and documenting the communication. And I was talking to somebody about this the other day, that writing performance stuff down is not sneaky, because some people are like, oh, you keep a book. Every officer should be keeping some sort of documentation for good and bad stuff. That's how you remember. So if you need to give somebody objective feedback about performance, how are you going to remember, that you talked with them 4 times about this, and on what, on and when, if you don't keep a record of that. So it's very important to when you're giving feedback and having these conversations, to keep some sort of record of that for yourself personally, good and bad stuff. It helps. It also helps for, obviously for evaluation time too. But sometimes when I'm trying to decide how or if I'm going to have a difficult conversation with someone, so if I feel a certain way, like the lazy example, let's say I feel like this person's lazy. To me, I have to go, what examples do I have of that? Or is that just something this is a personality thing? So I have to go back and look and say, well, I do have some examples, and maybe this is a valid thing. If I can't come up with any examples that are objective, and it's not just how I feel about someone, it's not time for the conversation yet. So make sure you keep some sort of documentation.
Yeah, documentation is the key. Without any of it, there's, if it went to the disciplinary route and there's no documentation, you got nothing. It's just words, and this is what we did, and it's just hard to progress anything without any proper documentation. So, that's the important kind of administrative side of all this, is that we're constantly documenting what we're doing. But as Carrie talked about too, it's the good stuff too, right? Hard conversations aren't all bad. And I think the area where we can learn to have good hard conversations is with the positive stuff. Start having those positive conversations on motivation and encouragement. Then that's where it starts. Everybody learns. Everybody grows.
Yeah, and for me, if I sidestep a hard conversation just because I don't want to have it, man, it usually eats at me. I'm like, man, I should have said something. Especially if it's one of those, like, I should have said something right then. Because almost always the behavior repeats itself, and you're like, if I would have just said something before. So I would say something. If you see it, what is that, the new thing? See, if you see something, say something. Yeah. Not just for terrorism.
Yeah. Yeah, and be prepared to not get the results that you want to, because if you think one conversation is going to fix everything, you're setting yourself up for some major disappointment, because it's probably not going to. The goal would be to see incremental change, and if an improvement action plan, it's an attainable improvement action plan that, the person within the meeting is, the conversation, they have their input on that as well, to an extent, so we get everybody involved and set goals and move forward together as one unit where we can all learn and grow. But it's don't anticipate great things after one hard conversation. It's probably going to take many hard conversations to really enact change within a person, within a character, within an organization. It's a lot of hard conversations. And speaking on the organizational side, when you're looking at shifting a culture, changing a culture, bringing in change, there's a lot of hard conversations that need to happen. And I think the more you involve more people within your organization to have these hard conversations about operations or training or all sorts of things, it just brings more ideas to the table, whether they're right or wrong. But it's also a great learning experience for, younger future leaders of an organization. So these hard conversations can happen in multiple kind of arenas or environments. And it's not just, it doesn't always have to be that one-on-one as well.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really, really good point.
Yeah, I feel like, I was just thinking about that and I'm like, well, that could probably be a whole nother episode on how to, just organizational change and hard conversations and how, we bridge from here to there. But I think at the end of the day, it's really working on yourself and all the stuff that we talk about all the time. And, just becoming the truest version of yourself. So a lot of this stuff just becomes normal, and it's cool seeing the change and the progress that we're seeing in terms of these conversations. And it's just being open-minded and the ability to listen.
Yeah, and another point, I, I, which I think is so important, is everyone is on the other end of these conversations at some point as well. So remember, when you are being called in to be spoken to, or somebody wants to address something with you, remember this same conversation that we're having with the person giving the hard conversation. Is you're the receiver now. So how can you make this a better conversation? Because you may be immediately defensive, like, no, they're wrong. I didn't do any of that. But there is a reason that you are being addressed. There's a reason that this conversation has started. So maybe that you are the one to make the conversation more productive. Like, oh, okay, I can see where you're coming from, or I can't quite see where you're coming from, but let's work on that. Because if someone is addressing your performance or your behavior or your attitude, there is something somewhere that is causing that, right? So remember when you're on the other end of these conversations too, that you can improve these conversations as well, make them more productive.
Yeah, I think that's what it's all about: progress, learning, and growing. I think when I think of hard conversations now, and I've a lot of mistakes in my younger years. It pretty much comes down to, regardless of what the issue is what do you need and how can I help? A lot of times that can look at like empathy and compassion, right? It's really, but what do you need and how can I help? Or and if I can't help, how can I find somebody to help? That's the goal of it, and it takes all these things and these conversations to get that out of somebody. But that is, if you're having the conversation, that should be that's what you're going in with. What do you need and how can I help? Because I want to get you there. I do. But again, a lot of that comes with a shift in a culture. And I think right now we're at this time where some people just are not going to believe that they're going to go into an office and have an environment like what we're talking about here today, Carrie. It's going to be that you do this or else. It's going to be the shame and the fear type leadership. Shame and fear management, because that's not leadership. And that's what they're going to try and do to get the point across. Again, as we're in this growth phase, especially with this kind of stuff, we're still going to have some of the goods and some of the bads. And it's like, how do we work and get around all of that? So yeah, there's not much to say with that, but it's just understanding that that's the goal, to improve everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, it's and I'm trying to think how to say this. Like, once you've done all the compassion and you've done all the genuine, all the coaching, all the mentoring, and you've come at it from all of those places, then once it's time, and if it does eventually have to move to the next step, it's a much easier transition, because I've done all the things. I'm more comfortable with the discipline or the termination, or you know telling someone maybe this isn't for them, because I've worked every other angle that I can, and I that's the next right step.
Yeah. Did I do everything I possibly could? And then
Yep.
like you said, it'll make that step easier. And if you don't, what kind of regrets would you have further down the line as well?
Yeah, and I mean, and the regret part for me, but also for on the other end, if you're the person that's having all these performance issues and you've got someone there, a supervisor that has bent over backwards to help, to try to figure out, what's the issue? Is it coaching? Is it mentoring? Is it training? Is it confidence? Is it support? Is it a technique thing? Is it different gear? Whatever it is. And then they've done all these things for you, and they're bringing objective examples to you of why it's still not working. I mean, what do you have to argue about? What do you have at that point, other than usually sometimes acceptance that you're right, this is not working out?
Yeah. And that's okay. Life is we're constantly learning and growing. So things don't always have to stay as they are. And there's nothing wrong with that.
All right. Well, this was a great conversation.
It was. Now everybody.
Oh.
No, it was that was not. It's gotten a lot easier since episode 1, so that's pretty
No,
awesome.
I mean we were talking. I meant I was being honey.
Yeah.
A difficult conversation. It's not difficult.
But now we want everybody out there to go out and go have those hard conversations, because there's probably something you want to talk to somebody about. So go do it. This is your sign. As we wrap up another episode, this has been Kyle
and Carrie
from the Heat of Command podcast.
Thank you, as always, for listening. Please make sure to follow and subscribe on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube. And as always, we love the feedback. Keep it coming.
See you next time.